Okay, past participles as adjectives. So in English, past participles usually end in ed, and they are frequently used with the verb to be to describe people, places, and things. And that, of course, in Spanish is the verb estar. Some examples of English past participles used with to be would be the wall is painted. Obviously, is the LA usted form of to be. I could also say the books are returned. I could say the paper is written. Written is irregular in English, just like it is in Spanish, but those are some examples for you there. The article is published. El artículo está publicado. Past participles are frequently used with the verb estar to describe the result of an action. What's not listed on this page is that past participles can also be used with the verb ser to describe something in the passive voice. An example of that would be El libro fue escrito por John Grisham. That translates in English to the book was written by John Grisham. That's the passive voice because the person doing the action is not actively doing the action, it's just passively doing the action, like the cookies were eaten by John. The normal way to say that sentence would be John ate the cookies. If I write it in the passive voice, it would be the cookies were eaten by John. So John's not actually actively doing the verb in that sentence, so that's what makes it a passive sentence. Okay. So as I mentioned before, past participles, and this is probably the more common thing that you're going to see, past participles are frequently used with the verb estar to describe the result of an action. To form the past participle of a verb, and this is something we've been doing with the verb haber for the last 2 weeks, you're going to add auto to the end of AR verbs and ido to the stem of ER-IR verbs. So of course I'm going to remove the AR from hablar, and I'm going to add auto to make hablado. Here's some examples. Arreglar would become arreglado. Esconder would become escondido. And pedir would become pedido. Now, when the past participle is used as an adjective, you have to be sure that the ending agrees in number and gender with the noun it describes. For example, el horno está arreglado. Now, all of these participles, when we make them, we're going to go masculine singular to start with, right? If we go back to this screen before, right here, I've got the masculine singular ending as kind of my base model, right? So I'm already going to end with that, but then I have to look back at the noun it's describing and say, is this masculine or singular, masculine or feminine? It's masculine, and I know that mostly because the definite article here is L, and L is a masculine definite article, and it's singular because this masculine definite article does not end in an S. So this is masculine and it's singular, which means my answer needs to be masculine and singular. Okay? Next, las tapas están pedidas. Las is feminine and plural. Feminine because it's la, plural because it has an S. So it needs to be feminine with an A and plural with an S. Las tapas están pedidas. Now, you can always look at the noun itself, but if you're not 100% sure on whether the noun is masculine or feminine, then you need to look at the article. There will almost always be a definite or an indefinite article. Obviously, these are your definite and indefinite articles. Hold on a second. So these are your definite articles, el and la and los and las. And they're called definite because if I said el lápiz, then I would mean the pencil. And the, in that case, refers to a specific pencil, right? It's definite. And an indefinite article is un and una, or unos and unas, and that means a or an or some, and that's less specific and less definite. So they're indefinite articles. So these are most of the time what you're going to see before the noun, and these will be really helpful for you to figure out whether your participles should be masculine or feminine or singular or plural. If you look at these do not lie. The only time it gets more complicated is if your participle, excuse me, if your noun that you're going to be describing isn't preceded by an article, then you have to get a little bit craftier and know how that article, how that noun, excuse me, is masculine or feminine or singular or plural. The plural is pretty easy because it'll end in an S, but masculine, feminine, sometimes you don't know. So these will always be helpful if you see them. If they're not there, then you have to know about the noun itself. Okay, so that's the translation there. Now, there are some verbs that have irregular past participles, and y'all should already know this. Okay, so past participles and adjectives, we've already gone through this. Hold on. Okay, so some verbs have irregular past participles, so memorize this acronym if you haven't already. Cramped, VVRFH. And here's what it stands for. Cubierto, roto, abierto, muerto, puesto, escrito, dicho, visto, vuelto, resuelto, frito, and hecho, which is cut off a little bit on the screen there. And those obviously come from the verbs cubrir, romper, abrir, morir, poner, escribir, decir, ver, volver, resolver, freír, and hacer, which is definitely cut off there. Now, something for you to keep in mind. Okay, so when you have prefixes on verbs like descubrir instead of cubrir, it's still going to be irregular just the same way that cubrir was. So instead of it being cubrir becomes cubierto, descubrir becomes descubierto. Instead of poner becomes puesto, exponer becomes expuesto. Describir becomes descrito instead of escribir, escrito. And devolver becomes devuelto instead of volver is vuelto. And I didn't highlight this orange, but you can see literally it's just the same prefix getting added. Nothing else weird is happening, okay? So moving along. Double vowel verbs, one last thing. Double vowel verbs that end in ER have accents over the I in their participles. So caer becomes caído and leer becomes leído. Those are some examples there. Okay, so let's practice. Here are your practices. Okay, so las ventanas is my subject, and I'm going to do romper, and the participle for romper is roto, but then I have to match it with the noun, which is feminine and plural. So that would be rotas. Great, they all disappeared. La cuenta está. In fact, maybe you should go through real quick, hit pause, go through and try to figure these out, and then we will come back to the answer. Okay, so la cuenta está. La cuenta is the thing that I'm going to describe with my participle. Pagar, I would originally go pagado, but I have to change it to be feminine and singular, so it would be pagada. Next up, el ensayo fue blank por Julián. So el ensayo is masculine and singular, which is the normal way I would put escribir anyway, so it'd be escrito. La tienda no está. The normal past participle of abrir, normal. The default past participle of abrir would be abierto. And then I'm going to match it with a feminine singular noun. So la tienda no está abierta. Los pasteles están hechos. And that's because los pasteles and the past participle of hacer was hecho. So this is plural, this is plural, this is masculine, this is masculine. Desafortunadamente, that's a fancy long way of saying unfortunately, actually the only way to say it. Su pierna está. So unfortunately, her leg is, and I'm describing what as being broken, her leg. So that is feminine and singular. So it'd be rota. Los pirámides fueron blank por los esclavos. The pyramids were built by the slaves. What was built by the slaves? The pyramids. And construir is describing the pyramids, which is masculine and plural. You can see the S there. So it would be construidos. There we go. El perro está blank en el patio. So the dog is asleep on the patio. El perro is singular and masculine, and I can see that right here. El. So it would be dormido en el patio. Las pinturas fueron, so the female plural paintings were pintadas por Salvador Dalí. And the last one, el problema está. This is a tricky one. A lot of y'all probably said resuelta because problema ends in an A. But little known fact, most words that end in MA in Spanish are actually masculine. If you had just looked at your definite article here, which I told you, definite articles don't lie, it is singular and masculine, which is why resuelto is singular and masculine. And there you have it.